The first time I touched Maren Whitaker's hand, she was collapsing in the middle of the sidewalk, surrounded by broken dishes, torn cardboard, and a little boy crying over a photograph that had fallen face up in the dust. I had only gone outside to bring in my mail, but within seconds I was standing in the wreckage of a stranger's life, holding one end of a box labeled fragile while she whispered that she could not lose one more thing. Before this story goes any further, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, because sometimes one small act of help can open a door that two broken hearts never expected to walk through. My name was Everett Cole, and by the time Maren moved into the pale blue house beside mine, I had become the kind of man neighbors described as polite but distant. I fixed loose porch rails, shoveled driveways after storms, returned misdelivered mail, and waved with just enough warmth to avoid questions. What I did not do was stay. I did not stay for coffee, or cookouts, or Sunday conversations over hedges. 3 years earlier, my wife, Claire, had died after a long illness that turned our once lively home into a quiet museum of folded blankets, unopened curtains, and memories I was too afraid to touch. Since then, I had convinced myself that loneliness was safer than attachment, that silence was easier than hope, and that helping people from a distance was the only kind of kindness I could afford. Maren arrived on a bright Saturday morning with a rented moving truck, a faded red sedan, and a child who looked about 7 years old but carried himself with the serious caution of someone much older. The boy's name was Finn, though I did not learn it until later. He stood near the curb clutching a stuffed fox against his chest while his mother dragged box after box from the truck with the stubborn determination of a woman who had already been disappointed by too many people. Her hair was pinned messily at the back of her neck, her sleeves were rolled up, and there was a bruise of exhaustion beneath each eye. She kept glancing at her phone, not as if she expected help, but as if she feared someone might call and ruin even this fragile attempt at beginning again. That I watched from my porch longer than I should have, arguing with myself the way lonely people do when kindness asks them to step out of hiding. The boxes were too heavy, the driveway too steep, and the day too warm for one person to unload an entire life alone. When one box slipped from her hands and split open on the sidewalk, scattering plates, children's books, and framed pictures across the concrete, Finn let out a sound that went straight through me. Maren crouched quickly, trying to gather everything, but her hands were shaking. I crossed the lawn before I had fully decided to move, and when I asked if she needed a hand, she looked up at me with eyes so guarded that I almost apologized for noticing her pain. She tried to refuse at first. Pride held her upright even when her knees looked ready to give way. She said she could manage, but at that exact moment another box slid from the tilted stack inside the truck and landed with a dull thud near the ramp. Finn flinched, and Maren closed her eyes as if the sound had struck something deep inside her. I did not push. I simply lifted the broken box, tucked the loose items carefully inside, and told her I was already outside anyway. That was not true, but it was the kind of small lie grief permits when it helps another wounded person breathe. After a moment, she nodded once, and the wall between strangers cracked just wide enough for me to carry the first box into her house. The house smelled of fresh paint, old wood, and the lemon cleaner someone must have used before handing over the keys. Sunlight streamed through bare windows, landing in bright squares across the empty floor. Maren had almost no furniture, just a small table, 2 kitchen chairs, a mattress still wrapped in plastic, and boxes marked kitchen, bedroom, Finn, and papers. The word papers had been written in thick black marker and underlined twice. I noticed because Maren noticed me noticing it, and her face changed. It was only for a second, but I had seen fear enough to recognize it. She moved that box herself, keeping it close, and I pretended not to wonder what kind of life made a woman protect paperwork like treasure. For the next 2 hours, we carried boxes in the clean light of afternoon. Finn warmed to me slowly, first by showing me where to place his books, then by asking if my toolbox was real, then by telling me that his stuffed fox was named Captain because someone needed to be in charge. Maren smiled at that, and the smile transformed her face so suddenly that I felt a quiet ache behind my ribs. She was younger than the tiredness made her look, maybe in her mid-30s, with a kindness she seemed determined to hide from the world until the world proved it deserved to see it. Every time I reached for a heavy box, she thanked me as if I were doing something extraordinary, though all I was doing was carrying weight she had been forced to carry alone for too long. The turning point came when we reached the final boxes at the back of the truck. One was wedged beneath a collapsed side panel, and when I pulled it free, an envelope slipped out and landed near my shoe. I saw only a few words before Maren snatched it up, but they were enough to tighten the air between us: custody hearing, emergency petition, relocation. Her face drained of color. Finn was inside the house, humming to himself as he arranged books on the floor, and Maren stood there in the driveway with that envelope pressed against her chest. She did not explain, and I did not ask. But silence sometimes says more than confession. I understood then that this move was not just a change of address. It was an escape, a gamble, and maybe the last piece of courage she had left. When the truck was finally empty, Maren leaned against the doorway and looked at the house as if she were afraid to believe it belonged to her. The sun had shifted toward late afternoon, filling the kitchen with a golden brightness that made the bare room look almost warm. I told her I would bring back the hand truck I had borrowed from my garage, but before I could step away, she asked the question that changed both our lives. Her voice was quiet, almost embarrassed, when she said, "Can you stay for dinner?" Then she added quickly that it was nothing special, just soup from a pot she had packed in a cooler, bread from the grocery store, and maybe lemonade if Finn had not spilled it. I had refused invitations for 3 years, but something about the way she asked made it sound less like hospitality and more like a person standing at the edge of a bridge, hoping someone would keep her from stepping backward. That I should have said no. I had a house next door full of reasons to say no: a drawer still holding Claire's recipe cards, a dining table I had not used properly since her last good day, and a heart trained to retreat when warmth came too close. But Finn appeared in the hallway with Captain the Fox tucked under one arm and asked if I knew how to fix wobbly chairs, and my answer came before my fear could stop it. I stayed. Maren set 3 mismatched bowls on the small table, and we ate in a kitchen where half the boxes were still unopened and the chairs did indeed wobble. The soup was simple, the bread slightly crushed, and the lemonade too sweet, but I remember that meal more vividly than dinners in expensive restaurants because it was the first time in years that silence did not feel empty. It felt careful. It felt alive. As we ate, pieces of the truth surfaced between ordinary sentences. Maren had been a school librarian before leaving her old town. Finn loved science but hated loud voices. They had moved because Maren's ex-husband, Graham, had money, charm, and a talent for making other people doubt what she knew to be true. He had never left visible injuries when others could see them, but he had learned how to isolate her, belittle her, empty bank accounts, and make fear sound like love. When she finally filed for custody and left, he painted her as unstable. The hearing was in 2 weeks, and the paperwork in that box was her proof. As she spoke, she kept her eyes on her bowl, ashamed of things that were not her fault. I listened without interrupting, and for the first time in years, my own grief loosened its grip enough to make room for someone else's pain. That I told her a little about Claire. Not everything, not yet, but enough. I told her Claire had loved early dinners on sunny days, had filled our kitchen with music, had believed strangers were simply friends who had not been fed yet. I told her that after Claire died, I had stopped inviting anyone in because every kindness felt like a door to another goodbye. Maren looked at me then, really looked, and there was no pity in her face. Only recognition. Broken people know the difference between being pitied and being understood. Finn, who had been pretending not to listen, reached across the table and placed Captain beside my bowl, announcing that the fox liked me. It was the first blessing I had received in a long time. Over the next several days, the neighborhood began doing what neighborhoods often do when they sense a story unfolding. Curtains shifted. Questions traveled. A woman named Beatrice from across the street brought muffins and stayed too long. Mr. Holloway, who trimmed his lawn with military precision, asked whether Maren was renting or buying in a tone that sounded harmless but was not. I saw Maren shrink under each polite inquiry, and I began to understand how exhausting it was for her to exist under suspicion. So I did what Claire would have done. I fixed the wobbly chair. I repaired a loose cabinet door. I showed Finn how to plant marigolds along the walkway. I made sure Maren knew she owed me nothing, not conversation, not gratitude, not trust. Trust, I had learned too late in my own life, cannot be demanded. It can only be made safe enough to grow. Then Graham arrived on a blazing Thursday morning in a black SUV that looked too polished for our quiet street. I was in my driveway cleaning old paintbrushes when he stepped out wearing sunglasses and a smile that never reached his mouth. Maren was on her porch with Finn beside her, and the way the boy grabbed her hand told me everything I needed to know. Graham spoke softly enough that the neighbors could not hear, but his posture was a threat. Maren's shoulders stiffened, yet she did not retreat. I stayed where I was, close enough to witness, far enough not to make things worse unless I had to. When Graham noticed me, he lifted his chin and asked if I was the new handyman. Maren surprised us both by answering with a steadiness I had not heard before, saying I was her neighbor, and neighbors helped each other here. Graham laughed, but the laugh cracked when Beatrice appeared with her muffins. Mr. Holloway stepped out pretending to check his mailbox, and two other neighbors slowed on the sidewalk. For the first time, Maren was not alone in daylight with someone who counted on shadows. Graham lowered his voice, said something about court, about mistakes, about how no one would believe her. Maren's hand trembled, but she held the folder of papers against her chest and told him he needed to leave. He did not immediately. He glanced at Finn and said the boy belonged with stability. That was when I stepped closer, not with anger, but with the quiet firmness of a man who had lost too much to fear losing his courage too. I told him the street was full of witnesses, and if he wanted to discuss legal matters, he could do it through attorneys. The words were simple, but they landed like a locked gate. Graham left with his smile gone. Afterward, Maren broke down in the kitchen with sunlight all around her. She apologized for bringing trouble to the neighborhood, for needing help, for crying, for everything people apologize for when life has taught them their pain is inconvenient. I stood by the sink, unsure whether to move closer, until Finn climbed into her lap and wrapped both arms around her neck. That small act gave me permission to stop being a polite stranger. I sat across from her and told her trouble was not the same as burden. I told her needing help did not make her weak. I told her that some people survive storms by becoming shelters for others, and maybe that was what she was doing for Finn. She looked at me through tears and asked how I still believed in hope after losing Claire. The honest answer was that I had not fully, until a broken box spilled someone else's life onto the sidewalk and reminded me that hearts can open by accident. The custody hearing came on a bright morning with sharp blue skies and courthouse steps that looked too cold for human heartbreak. I drove Maren and Finn because her car had refused to start, and she spent the ride gripping the folder in her lap while Finn counted yellow cars to keep himself calm. I waited outside the courtroom because I was only a neighbor, though by then the word felt too small. Hours passed in hard plastic chairs and vending machine coffee. When Maren finally came out, her face was unreadable. For one terrible second, I thought she had lost. Then Finn ran into her arms, and she looked at me with tears shining in her eyes, and I understood. The judge had granted temporary full custody, ordered supervised visitation, and accepted her documentation as credible. It was not the end of the road, but it was the first safe mile. That afternoon, Maren invited me again for dinner, though the sun was still high enough to pour through the windows and turn the unpacked boxes gold. This time the table had a cloth on it, the chairs no longer wobbled, and Finn had drawn a picture of 3 people standing beside 2 houses with a fox between them. Maren cooked pasta with tomatoes from Beatrice's garden and bread that was not crushed. Halfway through the meal, she admitted she had almost not asked me to stay that first day. She had been afraid I would think she was desperate. I told her I had almost not said yes because I was afraid I would remember what it felt like to belong somewhere. She reached across the table, not dramatically, not like a movie trying too hard, but gently, as if offering both gratitude and permission. I took her hand, and for the first time since Claire's death, I did not feel guilty for wanting to live. Months passed in daylight, moments that healed us quietly. Finn's laughter returned first, bright and sudden, echoing across both yards as he chased butterflies with Captain tucked under his arm. Maren began working at the town library, where children adored her patient voice and adults trusted her calm strength. I opened my curtains. I cooked again. I found Claire's recipe cards and shared one with Maren, not as a goodbye to my past, but as proof that love does not disappear when new love grows beside it. There were hard days too. Letters from lawyers came. Finn had nightmares after supervised visits. Maren sometimes froze at unexpected sounds. I still had mornings when grief sat heavy at the foot of my bed. But we stopped pretending healing meant never hurting. Healing meant no longer hurting alone. On the first anniversary of Maren's move, the neighborhood gathered in her backyard under a bright afternoon sky. There were folding chairs, lemonade, Beatrice's famous muffins, and Mr. Holloway pretending he had not brought the largest bouquet of flowers. Finn had made a sign that said "Welcome home," though Maren had lived there for a year already. When she saw it, she cried, and no one looked away as if her tears were embarrassing. They were evidence. Evidence that fear had not won. Evidence that a woman once forced to run had built a place where her son could stand still. I watched her thank everyone, her voice steady, her eyes full, and I realized that my life had not begun again because I saved her. It began again because helping her gave me the courage to be saved too. Just before the food was served, Maren pulled me aside near the marigolds Finn and I had planted on her first week there. She told me she had spent years believing love was something that asked her to shrink, apologize, and survive quietly. Then she said I had shown her love could also carry boxes, fix chairs, wait patiently, protect without controlling, and stay for dinner without expecting anything in return. I could barely answer. Some moments are too sacred for perfect words. I only told her that Claire once believed every lonely house was waiting for a table to be filled, and that Maren and Finn had brought mine back to life. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before this story ends, leave a meaningful comment about the lesson you felt most deeply, that kindness can become a lifeline, that asking for help is not weakness, or that love after loss is not betrayal, but a brave new chapter. Maren's first dinner invitation had sounded so small, just a tired woman asking a quiet neighbor to share a simple meal in a half-empty kitchen. But sometimes the smallest invitations are the ones heaven hides inside ordinary days. I helped my new neighbor carry her boxes, and she asked me to stay for dinner. I thought I was only helping her move into a house. Instead, she helped me move out of my grief. Finn helped me remember how laughter sounded, and together we learned that home is not always the place where your story begins. Sometimes home is the place where someone sees your broken pieces, makes room at the table, and softly asks you to stay.